Well, good morning. Look what we have here, a 1981 Pontiac Parisienne. It's actually probably the Brome edition. It's here because the carburetor's flooding. A few weeks ago I did some work on the engine tune-up wise. Fixed vacuum lines and adjusted the spark timing and adjusted the carburetor, adjusted idle mixture, fast idle speed. But the carburetor was dripping at an idle. Probably needle and seat problem or float sunk. So we're going to remove this carburetor and rebuild it. So that's our job today. So I'll take little video clips strategically along the way. This is a dual jet, I believe, which is like basically half of a quadrijet. So that's the carburetor there. Like I said, it's like half of a quadrijet. The front half section is basically the same concept as a quadrijet without the rear barrels. So we're going to go ahead and remove this. We need a 1/2-inch socket for the bolts that hold it down, and a 1-inch wrench and a 5/8 wrench. You can see I had fixed the choke housing as it didn't have a proper ground. Somebody else had changed the choke pull off. But let's get started. Let's remove this carburetor. So you want to take note of any vacuum hoses and where they might go. Take a picture of it. Mark them if you're unsure. I know where these hoses go, so I should be okay. And I'm just going to move them off to the side. Disconnect the electrical connectors to the various devices. These clips on the throttle, pull out on them gently, slide them forward, and then disconnect them. And then a good practice is to put them back on there so you don't lose them. Just basically pull out on the connector, slide it forward, disconnect it. Can't see what I'm doing. And then put it back on so you don't lose them. And take the throttle return spring off. Disconnect the throttle valve cable by pushing it forward. And we got a brake booster vacuum line on the back, which is 5/8, and the fuel line on the front. I gotta squeeze this clip. So once you remove the fuel line with a 5/8 flare nut wrench and the brake booster vacuum line, remove the 4 bolts. There might be washers under here, so take them off. The 2 back bolts, they're 1/2-inch. And then basically with everything disconnected, the vacuum lines should just lift right off of here. Oh, one more bit. No, that's it. That's it. That's the carburetor off. Dump the gas out of it. And then put a rag over the top of that. We're going to pull that gasket off and have a look at it. The gasket should come in the carb kit, but we have to compare the new gasket. I'll put a rag over top of this to keep from anything from going in there. We're going to double check all these vacuum lines once we're putting it back together again to make sure there's no rotten ones. This one is rotten, I can see it. Yeah, that's a problem. Didn't see that one before. That goes to cruise control. I don't know if the cruise worked or not. So I like to mount the carburetor on a couple of bolts, either 5/16 or 8 mil bolts and nuts, so you can put it in the vise and it'll hold it there so you can work on it. Most of the stuff is from the top. There are some screws from the bottom which we'll take off at the very end. There is the carburetor number that you will need to order a proper kit for it. And you can see that I've cleaned it off and I've ordered a kit for it. Here's a closer look at those retaining clips for the throttle cable and the cruise control cable. This one's cruise, this one's throttle, and that was the transmission throttle valve cable, or kick down cable if you will. Controls the downshifts. Yeah, we're ready to start disassembling this thing. So as we start taking pieces off of this thing, you don't need a lot of tools to disassemble it. Basically a standard screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver. You do need a small punch. So pulling this gasket off of here. This should be in the kit. I certainly hope it is. I will show you the part number of this kit. This will come off in the carb cleaner, but I don't want all this extra garbage in my carburetor cleaner container. It's hard to find good carb cleaner anymore. There used to be the stuff that we had at the dealership when I was there 30 years ago, actually closer to 40 years now. You could put the carburetor, once it was disassembled, in the cleaner and it would be spotlessly clean in about 45 minutes. If you left it in there any longer, you took a chance of starting to deteriorate some of the castings. The new carb cleaner, I'm going to leave it in overnight because it's nowhere near as caustic and it takes that long to attack any of the gum and resin that might be in there. So I'm just scraping off this air horn gasket. Okay, I'm going to show you something on the other side. So the first thing you have to remove is this choke link. So close the choke valve and take this little standard screw out of here to remove the link. There's only one screw like this, so we don't need to worry about mixing them up. Now grab this link and pull it off. It's got like a little double square, and then give it a little wiggle and kind of turn it clockwise too at the same time, and it'll just come out of there. It's just hooked on that little arm on the choke lever down below, so that can stay together. And now we're ready to take a vacuum line off. We'll leave the vacuum line with this choke pull off here. Can't put the choke pull off in the carburetor cleaner because it has a neoprene diaphragm in it and that'll ruin it. But we can put the screws in the basket for cleaning. And of course I'm going to go through the carburetor adjustments when we're putting this back together again. So there's the choke pull off, and this one only has a primary choke pull off. Some had a secondary choke pull off bolted back here that worked through a thermal vacuum switch. Now the other screws now. Next we got to remove this link over here on this side for the accelerator pump. So there's an adjustment for the accelerator pump, and you notice that it's in the inboard hole. There will be in the specs which hole it is, either the inboard or the outboard. The inboard hole is going to give you more accelerator pump travel because of a shorter fulcrum point. And there's a little pin here that we have to knock in with a small punch. I'm hoping this punch works. Just until you see that link pop up. Not quite enough. Don't tap it all the way in, because you want to be able to get a screwdriver behind it. I have to get a thinner punch. A small nail will work too. Okay, I got a slightly different punch here, and we'll see if this works. There. So you don't want to drive that all the way in, because you want to be able to put a standard screwdriver behind that and pry it out. So that link can stay there for now. We need to take the this is the anti-dieseling valve off. We need to take that off, so I need a large Phillips screwdriver for that. So this is another part that you obviously don't want to put into the carburetor cleaner because of its little electric motor. Actually, it's a solenoid, I shouldn't say motor. It's just a solenoid with one screw. It has power when it's key on, and it goes like that. When you shut the key off, it de-energizes and the throttle closes, and that helps to prevent it from run-on or dieseling, as we used to call it. So we're good to remove the screws in the top of the carburetor. There are several Phillips screws. If you're unfamiliar with where they go, take note of their lengths. There's one there. I think 3 of them are the same length. And then there's 2 that go up from the bottom now that I recall on this carburetor. Well, maybe not. Wow, why is this one so tight? Seemed very tight, that one. I'm going to set that down here and then compare the lengths of the screws to make sure. I think they're all the same length if I remember correctly. So far those two are the same. Why this one doesn't want to come out of here? Oh, I think the screw, the washer stuck in there. That's what was going on. So it was threading through the washer. The lock washer is broken in there. Oh, well, we'll find a small lock washer for that. So that's 3. I think these 2 might be different if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I had one of these carburetors apart. Nope, they're the same. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Phillips screws and 2 standard countersunk screws inside the air horn that we're going to have to take off. 1, 2. So all the Phillips screws are the same size. And there's 2 down here that are countersunk standard screws inside the air horn. Those are them there. I don't know if we can see that. Let me adjust this camera. Grab a magnet. Crank sensor off of Ford works. There's a pencil magnet. Okay, so that's all of the screws on top. So this carburetor top should come off here now. I don't see any more. I'm pretty sure this is ready to come off, but it's stuck on here. There we go. And the gasket should stay with it. Now it doesn't matter if the gasket breaks because we have a new one. There we go. So that's the top of the carburetor, and there is nothing in here that you can't put in the carb cleaner. So other than scraping some of the excess dirt off of it, we're going to put that in the carburetor basket. Now we're going to take the gasket off. And you always want to compare the new gasket in the kit with the old one, so try not to destroy it as you're taking it off. Okay, so that's the gasket. We're going to put that off to the side because we're not going to reuse it. There's the accelerator pump plunger, so we're going to put that off to the side, not put that in the cleaner, but we will put the spring in there. And down in the accelerator well, there is a small ball. Now it could be aluminum, it could be steel. I think there's a ball in there. Let me get in here with a magnet and see for sure. This one may not have it in there, or it's aluminum, so that's not coming off. Alright, so this is the power valve. Let me see if that's showing up. Yeah, and it's not seized. During idle, when there's high vacuum, vacuum pulls it down against the spring, and the needle valves restrict the opening in the main jets. Under a load, under heavy load, vacuum drops, as you know, and then the spring overcomes the vacuum and lifts and raises the needle valves so that they're wider opening. So just tap it once like that and it'll pop out. So those are the needle valves. Now, because this little nylon washer on here can get damaged by the carburetor cleaner, we're not going to put this assembly in the carb cleaner. We're just going to leave it off to the side and carefully clean that by hand. Now there is a Bakelite plastic insert in here that just comes out. Put that off to the side. Don't put that in the carb cleaner. And now we have the float and the needle valve. So there's the needle valve. And there's the float. Now we can put the pin in there, but this stuff I have new. I have a new float because these floats tended to absorb gasoline. If you dry it off and then squeeze it with your finger, you'll sometimes see gas oozing out of it. So we're changing this float. Yeah, you can see that. Watch. I didn't do it that time. It becomes saturated with gasoline because of the age. So we got a new float, new needle valve. Now there is a small spring underneath here. I'm going to pick up the camera so you can see this better. So this spring in here is the one that pushes up on the needle valve, and that adjustment there should not be touched. Leave that piece in there. That's a height adjustment on the needle valve, and that determines the fueling. Sorry, the accelerator pump check ball is underneath that small standard screw down there. It's not in the bottom of the well like I thought it was. I forgot. It's been, like I said, it's been a while. So now we can take this accelerator pump link off the side here. Just turn it 90 degrees, and there's one spot where it'll come off. Where is that spot? Right there. Oh, well, I'll leave it there until the throttle is disconnected. We're going to take the seat out, and the spring out, and the check ball out, and the choke linkage off the other side. So remove this standard screw with the accelerator pump discharge check ball underneath, and remove the needle valve seat. That we get new in the kit. You need a wide standard screwdriver to go across these two crosses, but it's not that tight, and we're going to get a new one anyway, so we'll worry about that. There's a gasket underneath it, so make sure you get the gasket out. Doesn't want to come off, it's stuck on there. Doesn't want to come off. Okay, let's see if this check ball will come out with the carburetor, or with the, so that screw is the stop, and there's a check ball underneath it, and it did not come out. So I'm going to watch for that when we turn the carburetor upside down. That spring comes out. That can go in the cleaner. Now, whether you take the jets out is up to you. In some cases I will. In some cases I won't. This one here, let's see how tight they are. Oh, they're pretty loose, so I'm going to take them out. So there's a carburetor jet in the bottom, and like I said, that's what the needle valve goes into. It's actually marked with the dimension on the jet. I can't read this one, I need a magnifying. Looks like it says 14. No, 24. I can't see that. Well, we're not changing the jets. So we're just going to take them out so that the carburetor cleans better. And as I said, don't adjust or play with the stop screw on that height adjustment, because that is set on a flow test bench when the carburetor is calibrated at the factory. Now if you wanted to remove it, there is a special little tool. What you could do is turn it down and count the number of turns down until it bottoms out, and then record that. Actually, on this carburetor there is an aluminum plug, as you can see here. Let's get this screen up a little bit. Okay, so you can see this plug here. If you knock that plug out, you have access to that adjustment, that height adjustment, and you can actually adjust it through the top with a small, you can use a piece of 3/16 steel brake line and just squeeze it slightly oval, and it'll turn that screw. But you're not supposed to tamper with it. So I'm going to take the choke linkage off now, or the choke housing. So you might want to take a notice of where the choke adjustment is. This has been replaced, so it doesn't have the standard factory mark on it. If this was factory, it would be pop riveted on. So these screws come off. And of course, this electric choke element we do not put in the carb cleaner as well. These are self-tapping screws that were put in after the rivets were removed. So that's the choke heating element. That stays off. Next we have inside here a Phillips screw that we need. No, actually we don't need to take that off. We can just simply take the standard screw and leave that in there. But there are some seals in that housing. Wow, that's tight. Actually, there may not be seals in this housing because this one's not under vacuum. This one's got an electric heating element rather than using hot air from the exhaust crossover. Well, that screw's pretty tight. I better put some penetrating fluid on it. I don't know why that's so snug, but we better work it back and forth, otherwise we'll break it off. I'm putting it back in. Wow. Normally that just comes right out, but this screw is galling or something in here. Oh, I think we got her now. Now the carburetor kit will have an exploded diagram of the carburetor in pieces, but you know, if you're not sure, it's always wise to use your phone and take some pictures. So that screw, you can see it was oxidized. That one's different than all the rest. And there is the choke linkage, choke housing. Now we can disassemble this because there might be a little seal inside here. Yeah, let's take that off and have a look. And I see there's a little plastic piece on this arm. No, I gotta put that in the vise to put more pressure on it. All right, there's a little cross tube here that supplies, actually that's blocked off. No, it's open. It's open. So it's that little tube that goes in here, supplies vacuum to that choke housing. But I don't think this choke housing is actually drilled. No, it's not drilled. Because normally they had a threaded line on here. This housing is blind. It's not drilled. So there's no vacuum in here, so that's basically a plug. But that piece we'll have to remember to put in. And take the fuel filter out. I loosened it off on the car. It's a 1-inch, and there's a gasket on the end of this fuel filter nut, so you might as well take that off now. You get a new gasket in the kit. So inside here is supposed to be a fuel filter and a spring and there isn't any. There's supposed to be a push spring and a fuel filter inside that housing, and unless it's in the housing, no. This one takes the long paper fuel filter, and that does not come in the kit. So there's no fuel filter in here. Somebody must have put one in line at some point. Now you can see all the sediment in the bottom of the carburetor here, so that's not good. So two things will happen when you turn it upside down. This little link will fall out of here. This attached to the choke housing through this to the shaft, and that connected to that little vertical link that you disconnected. We're going to put that in later as we're putting the choke housing on. I'll show you that on the way in. And the check ball will fall out, which I saved. It's just a little, you get a new one in the kit, by the way, in case you lose it. But that's the accelerator pump discharge check ball. So now with the carburetor turned upside down, you can see there are 4 Phillips screws that hold the carburetor base to the float bolt. Now the idle mixture screws have already been busted open on this, and you need this special little D-shaped socket. There's the OTC tool number if it comes up on the screen here. Focus. 1753 to remove the idle mixture screws. There are other tools out there like this. So there's an idle mixture screw from one side. Put that in the cleaner with the spring. And the idle mixture screw from the other side. Now I said initially in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, the GM started to seal up the carburetor so you couldn't screw with the idle mixture screws. So these passages were actually cast over with little metal caps on them so that you couldn't adjust them. Somebody's actually removed this carburetor at some point and chiseled that open and broken the caps out so that we could go in and adjust the idle mixture on the vehicle. And that's good because we don't have to do that now. So now we can remove the base screws. Like I said, there's 5 of them. And I believe these are shorter than the ones in the top. Let's just double check and compare. Actually, they look exactly the same, which is good to know. I did take the accelerator pump link off the side of the throttle lever. This is just balanced on the vise here upside down right now. Yeah, all those screws are the same, so that should come off now. Okay, so that can go in the carb cleaner just as it. I'm going to scrape some of the excess dirt off of it. And we're going to take this gasket off and save it. And again, we're going to compare it to the replacement one, just to make sure that there's no missing passages. So we'll set that off to the side. So this entire housing can go in the carb cleaner just like that. I usually turn it sideways because it helps to get that piece of gasket off there. So inside here you can see where the main jets were, down in here. The accelerator pump discharge ball was down in there. And that gasket is still stuck in here on this needle valve. There it is. Okay, so there's the gasket. You get a new one of those on the needle valve. So we're ready to put all this in the carb cleaner and let it soak for 24 hours. So there's the carburetor ready to go to sleep with the fishes. And this is a pail full of carburetor cleaner. I think it's Gunk brand. And it's going to stay in there overnight. And we'll pick up when it comes out and wash it off. So there's the carburetor pieces all clean. Rinse them off with hot water and blow them all dry. Blow out all the passages with compressed air. Make sure that there's no passage that is restricted. You can see it come out pretty clean. There's a little bit of oxidation on the outside, but that's not going to hurt anything. We're ready to reassemble. So this is the carb kit that was supplied, and a new float. As I said, the floats have a tendency, or had a tendency, to become saturated with fuel and sink, and that results in a higher than normal fuel level in the float bowl, and it starts to overfuel. As I said, compare the gaskets in the kit to the gasket that you took out. You can see this looks the same. In case there's an extra passage or a missing drilled passage, this should be the correct kit for it, but you never know. This goes like this. Okay, so there's the base reinstalled, 5 screws. Remember, they were the same length as the top screws, so you don't need to worry about mixing them up. And now we can go ahead and mount this in the vise for easier access. Let's put the idle mixture screws in. So install the idle mixture screws, tighten them in and bottom them out just lightly, and I set them about 2.5 turns out. That's just a rough setting to initially start it. Reinstall this link. You'll notice that it goes in a certain way, just like that. Let it hang down there. That's our accelerator pump. There's a little seal right here for the choke shaft that needs to be replaced. It comes in the kit. And I noticed that little plastic connector tube that was in here. It's just a plug anyways. It wasn't supplied in the kit, so we're going to have to reuse the original one. This goes in here, just like that. Does it go that way or does it go this way? No, it's got to go this way. Normal, some of these choke housings had vacuum on them, so this was a vacuum passage from inside the carburetor, but this one is sealed off, so that's just a plug. On some of these choke housings, that boss was threaded and there was a steel line running to a heat crossover, but this is an electric choke. So we're ready to reinstall the choke housing. So if you remember, there was this little link that came out of here that goes onto this choke housing, and it goes onto the choke shaft. So you need to basically drop it in there with a magnet, or sometimes you can use a little rod and attach it as you're putting this choke housing in place. Let's see here, where does this go? Just like that. Okay, you'll see the little lever sticks through inside there. So you need to back this off slightly and drop that link in. So I use a little pencil magnet to hold it at about that position and drop it in there. That's it. Now we put the screw in and we're good to go. And that was a standard screw, standard headed screw. Yeah, that was the one that was really stiff coming out. Now it goes in nice and easy. Make sure the choke linkage works. So this is the fast idle cam here, and the choke coil will turn the choke in this direction. Okay, let's put the jets in. So the jets are installed. There's the little accelerator pump discharge check ball. It drops into that little hole, and then that screw with the stud on the end of it goes in. That's this screw here. Focus. Just drop that in and use a standard screwdriver to thread that down. Now we have the little spring for the power valve, this little power valve spring. It looks like a spring out of a Bic pen. I'd like to stretch it just a little bit. And then the actual power valves. Now we did not put the power valves in the cleaning solution because of this little nylon retainer here. It'll swell up sometimes. So we're going to clean this brass cylinder with some emery cloth and make sure the needle valves, you can see they're tapered, make sure that they're clean. So I use some emery cloth here to clean the needle valves and the brass part of this. Now I'm going to spray a little bit of either silicone spray. Yeah, I think I'm going to use silicone spray. Or actually, I got some penetrating fluid here just to lubricate that because it slides up and down by vacuum. So we have to install the needle valve in its seat before we put the power valve in. So this is the seat, and there's a gasket that's got to go on here. Focus. Okay, so put the gasket on and drop this in carefully into the carburetor. Make sure the gasket's in place, and you need a wide flat screwdriver to tighten this down. should have a wide screwdriver here. So that's how the needle valve, there's a little retainer that hangs on there, and then this goes through the pivot, and we can now drop it in place in the carburetor. Like so. And we need to check the float height. So we need to hold this down and put light pressure on the needle valve and then see how high this float is. So we're going to look up the spec now on the sheet. Well, I'm disappointed. There's no instructions nor exploded pictures in this carburetor kit. Normally it used to come with a sheet with specifications, so I'm going to have to look it up. Oh well. So after searching around, because this is an 81, so information is hard to find, plus it's Canadian emissions, I finally found a spec of 3/8 of an inch. So that's measured by putting light pressure on the float to close the needle valve, and measured from the top of the air horn here to about 3/16 of an, or 3/8 of an inch into the big side of the float. So right now it's about 7/30 seconds. We need 12/30 seconds. So I'm going to carefully bend the float down. There is an actual tool for this. And there is a tool for checking the float level once it's together and running on the vehicle, but that only confirms that it's okay. You can't adjust it. So that's roughly 7.5. I think we got some adjustment there now. A little bit lower. I've got my finger on the needle valve, closing it, and then another finger pushing down on the pivot so that I can see it. There we go. That's 12/30 seconds, which is 3/8. So now we can put this piece in, and the needle valves. And you got to make sure that the needle valves go into the jets, which is a little bit of a challenge because you can't see them. Kind of feel around in here until you find it, the sweet spot. Don't try and force it, otherwise you'll bend the needle valve. Come on, there we go. And then we need a small tool to push this retainer back in place. Small screwdriver or a pick of some kind. And I put a little bit of penetrating fluid on the brass body of that power valve. Just going to give it a little shot in here. There's no fuel in that area. It's engine vacuum. Vacuum pulls this down, and when there's low vacuum, when you're under a load, the spring pushes it up and enriches the fuel mixture. So we're pretty much ready for the accelerator pump. Now the accelerator pump, you have to reuse this spring. So basically compress the spring and take this retainer off. Okay, now you get a new plunger. That's it right there. And we need, wow, that seems long. Let me compare this. No, that's right. Put the plunger on there. And we're going to have to compress this to get the spring back in without losing it across the shop. There we go. Now I'd like to put some silicone on this rubber diaphragm here. Now, was there a spring underneath this? I'm trying to remember if there was a spring under here. I better look at the diagram. Yes, this spring goes underneath the accelerator pump to push it back up. Actually, it might actually push on to the end. No, it just sits in there. And we need to compare the gasket now. This gasket's got to go on here like so, and we need to compare it to the original gasket to make sure that there's no missing holes or extra holes. It looks the same. Now you have to kind of work this underneath the power valve, so you have to kind of push this down and underneath the power valve. Come on. There we go. There's dowel pins on the gasket. And that's pretty much it. Alright, we're ready to install the upper part of the carburetor, I believe, which is this. Make sure there's no gaskets on there. Material. There we go. And we'll put the screws in. Now I have to look for a lock washer for one of the screws. So basically reinstall all the screws in the top. They're all the same length, except for the two tapered countersunk ones that go down inside here. And tighten them in a star fashion, alternating. Snug them all down first. Now they do give you a new roll pin for this accelerator pump pivot, but you really don't need to replace it. In fact, it's difficult to get it out. And now we got the two tapered countersunk screws. Where are they? That go in from the top here. So to reinstall this choke lever, accelerator pump lever, you need a guide pin. So I'm using one of the replacement rivets. So, and it's in the original spot where it was. Let's see, come on, get that. There you go. line that up, and then that's why we didn't press this pin all the way in, because we're going to use this standard screwdriver to pry it back out. There we go. Good to go. Now there's that little link that goes in the back here on the push rod, or on the choke lever, and this goes like this. So you need to go in and turn sideways and kind of wiggle it, and then it'll attach to the choke shaft like so, and then put the screw in. Where is the screw? Where is the screw? This little standard screw here. And make sure that the choke closes with the, it doesn't close until you open the throttle slightly. Okay, so we can put the choke housing on. Now this kit supplied with self-tapping screws, so we're going to use these self-tapping screws in here because they're a lot better than the PK screws that were in there. Yeah, that's going to work really well. I'm not going to re-rivet it. So there's a choke housings set at 1 notch lean. Lean is this way, rich is that way. Turning it counterclockwise puts more tension on the bimetal spring in there. It should snap shut when you accelerate. And then of course the heating element heats up the coil and it will relax. Now we're going to install the choke pull off, which goes in here to open the choke slightly when the engine is started. So here's the setup for adjusting this primary choke pull off, or choke vacuum brake as often referred to. Mount the thing, the vacuum pull off, and hook it up to a small vacuum pump. Put the choke angle gauge on here like so and set it to 0 and level the level. Now the spec range is anywhere from 21 to 28 degrees, so I figure we're going to set it for about 25. So we would adjust this to 25, and now carefully put vacuum on the choke pull off, and it'll open the choke valve. There it goes. And let the weight of the linkage. But now this gauge should be level, but it's not. So I'm going to adjust this rod until the gauge is level. Now you can always fine adjust this after the words, but this is the technical proper way to set the choke angle. Now some carburetors are done with a feeler gauge or plug gauges. So that's set at 25 degrees. Bleed the vacuum off, the choke will close again. Open the choke with the vacuum pull off. Let's tweak it just a little bit. It's about 3/16 of an inch on the top edge. Now we can put the fuel filter nut out. Now this customer had installed, or somebody has installed, an inline fuel filter, so we're not going to bother with the fuel filter that was normally in this housing. But we do have to put the gasket on here, and it's very important that you slide the gasket over that like so. Focus. And then thread it into the carburetor face. I'm just going to leave it loose. I'm going to tighten it with the wrench when it's on the vehicle. And then we're done with the choke angle gauge. Put our piece of vacuum hose on the choke pull-off. That's actually kind of short. I'm going to change this. So that's basically the carburetor reassembled. This is the anti-diesel solenoid. As I said, when the key is turned on, it bumps up and opens the throttle. Now the fast idle is on now, so you can't see how much it would open it, but it would basically open it that far. And of course, when you shut the key off, this electric solenoid retracts, and that closes the throttle blade to help reduce the likelihood of a run-on or dieseling effect. I know the solenoid works because I had adjusted it before. This is the base idle stop screw. There is a fast idle stop screw down underneath here for fast idle when the choke is on the high step, and there's an adjustment for that too. But that's all done on the vehicle once it's running. So there's the carburetor reinstalled. I replaced this vacuum line that runs to the cruise transducer here to the resume solenoid. I doubt the cruise control works. I adjusted the cruise linkage. It's supposed to be about a 1/16 of an inch when the throttle is completely closed, and it is right now. And got the vacuum hose plugged off here so I can start it up. Fuel line reconnected. Yeah, we're going to fire it up and go through the idle speed and idle mixture adjustments. Well, there it is running. I'm going to run it up to temperature and go through the adjustments. The tach is not working on here. Oh, there we go. 1200 RPM. It's on fast idle. The choke's heating up. So we're going to run it to temperature. So here's the base idle adjusted with the solenoid active, 600 in drive, and with the solenoid inactive, 500 in drive. You could actually go lower than that if it diesels on you. So in park it's about 9. I think it's about 650 right now. I'm going to set this up. We'll put this in drive. A little high. 650. I'll show you the carburetor adjustment, or the idle mixture adjustment. So basically with it idling, turn the idle mixture screw in. So here it's starting to slow down. So it's about 2 turns right now. Keep track of where it is. Both sides should be the same. I just basically adjust it till I get the smoothest, highest idle, and then reset the base idle. I'm going to put the air cleaner back on. And make sure the heat stove here works. And it does. So there, it's back together and running. I did change the fuel filter down there at the fuel pump. This heat stove works. So the door is actually it's open now inside here, but there's a thermostatic sensor in there that brings warm air from up around the exhaust manifold, and that works. Base idle is now 610. We're going to take it for a road test and see how it runs. Well, it runs pretty good. Let's see if the cruise control actually works. Should work above 60k. Set. I don't believe it. It actually works. Yeah. Well, it wouldn't have worked before with that vacuum leak in that cruise control supply line, but it's working now. This actually has the resume feature on it. That's what that extra solenoid was for back on that thing. And it cancels. Beautiful. There's no tack. Look at the gauges in this thing. A fuel gauge and a speedo. And the rest are warning lights. Let's see how it idles. Beautiful. It's good to go. Thanks for watching.